Today's episode is about polymathy.
Welcome to the Deliberate Creative Podcast, where we demystify the creative process, explain the research, and give practical advice and strategies to help you be more creative and build an innovative team. Now, here's creativity coach, team development trainer, and your host, Amy Clymer.
Welcome to the Deliberate Creative Podcast, episode 101. It is so good to be back. For those of you who don't know, I reached episode 100 on December 31st, 2018. And then I decided I needed to take a break. I announced on that episode that I was going to take a break and that I would be back at some point because I was feeling a bit burned out, to be honest. I was finding that I wasn't looking forward to recording podcasts. And this whole experience of having a podcast is truly a labor of love. And it was starting to become like a labor of dread. I was not looking forward to each episode. And I realized, wait a minute, this isn't working right now. Maybe I should take a break. So I decided, all right, I'm going to get to episode 100 because I was pretty close. And I was bound and determined to get it finished before the year was out. So the last day, December 31st, 2018, episode 100 dropped. And I said, I'll be back at some point. I'm not sure when. I thought that I might be back in like maybe 3 months or so. Well, it took an entire year. And here I am, January 2020, back at it. And I am super excited. I'm feeling really energized and ready to get started again. And actually, the whole experience of taking that break for a year, it was an interesting experience and reflection on burnout and how sometimes we're doing something and we think that we have to do it and then realize, wait a minute, I'm making this up, right? Like I'm making up that I need to have a podcast. I make up almost everything I do. That's part of being an entrepreneur. And I realized, I'm going to take a break and see what happens. And what was interesting is that actually the podcast kept growing. It kept well over 100,000 downloads. And actually episode 100 was one of the most listened to episodes, which blew me away. So it's interesting. It was like, okay, I took a break and nothing really bad happened. And although several people did email me and say, oh my gosh, you're taking a break. I can't wait till you're back. So here we are, back at episode 101, and I'm super excited about it. There are 2 changes that I'm making moving forward with the podcast. The first is I'm moving into seasons. So I could think of season 1 as episode 0 through 100, kind of a long season, but I didn't think of the season concept at first. But now I'm in season 2, and the seasons will all have themes. And the theme for this season is research on creativity and innovation, particularly how it relates to teams and organizations. And I'm interviewing a number of researchers who have, in the last few years, published or produced some research on creativity and innovation. So I'm really excited about that. The second change is that all of the episodes, in addition to being available on your favorite podcast app, will also be on YouTube. So there will be video and audio. So for this particular episode, the video is not so important, but sometimes they're like, for instance, the next episode is about creative space. And so it's quite visual. And so for that episode, the video is not critical, but helpful. It's nice, kind of a nice to have. So you can look for that on my YouTube channel, which is Amy Clymer. Just go to YouTube and Amy Clymer, Climer. You'll find the YouTube channel there. So today is focused on polymathy, which is a concept that was new to me, a term that's new to me. And I'm very excited to interview Dr. Angela Cotellessa. And she did some excellent research for her dissertation. And turns out she's the only person she knows of that has done a dissertation on polymathy. And she's really pioneering this field. And you'll learn more about what polymathy is in a moment. But Angela and I met at the Southern Oregon University Creativity Conference. It's a creativity conference for researchers that happens once a year. I think it's only in its second or third year. And we met this last year, and I was really impressed with her work and the concepts and what she was presenting. And so I invited her to be on the podcast. So, all right, here's Angela. Angela, welcome to the Deliberate Creative Podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Amy. It's good to be here.
Can you start off and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I think the main reason I'm here talking to you today is based on my doctoral dissertation. Mm-hmm. So I studied and researched and wrote about modern day polymaths, which is a fancy word for Renaissance man or woman. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of my academic hat that I wear. I also have a full-time job and a career in the federal government in the leadership development space. So I've worked at the Center for Leadership Development in the federal government for about 7 years. And before that, I spent 6 years as a non-political employee at the Executive Office of the President.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then aside from that, I also work in real estate, family real estate business. So that's my third sort of hat that I wear as a professional. I'm also a mom, a wife, a friend, sister.
Nice. Awesome.
So, and I live in the Washington, D.C. area.
Cool. I didn't know about the family real estate thing. I'm actually one of the few people in my family without a real estate license.
Oh!
We have that fun commonality there.
Yeah, nice.
Connection. Yeah. All right, so we're going to dig into the research that you did. And so just kick us off and tell us a little bit about what is polymathy. Am I saying that right, by the way?
Yeah, polymathy. I think the British say it different, like polymathy or something like that. But
okay,
Americans call it polymathy. So basically what that is, it's a fancy word for Renaissance man or woman. It's the opposite of a narrow specialist. So this is someone who has experience and expertise and exposure across multiple domains, but also some depth. They're more than a dabbler. They're not someone who just sort of tries things once or twice and then, oh, that makes me a polymath. The idea of a polymath is that, yes, you have that breadth, but you also have some depth and some expertise along with it. So these are highly accomplished, highly intelligent people. I will say that from a scholarly perspective, there's no agreed upon technical definition. I just sort of gave you my off the cuff description of how would a layperson understand or a fellow scholar sort of make sense of the concept. But yeah, it's basically someone who's very broad, but also has depth. And because of that, they're able to uniquely integrate and apply ways of thinking, ways of doing from one area to another. So this is where it relates to creativity, because as I'm sure we're going to talk about more, one of the superpowers of a polymath is their ability to do this kind of analogical thinking and to apply tools and approaches from one domain to another to come up with creative solutions.
Nice. What curiosity led you to study this? Like, why polymathy?
Yes. Well, I will say when I started my doctoral program, got into it, and the professor started talking about the dissertation, they emphasized over and over and over again, pick a topic you actually care about, because if you don't, it's highly likely you might not finish. Right. And there's plenty of people who are ABD, all but dissertation, and never finish. So I was really like, what do I care about? What do I want to be when I grow up? And polymaths are what I want to be when I grow up. And it really, for me, started when I was about 18. I went off to college. I had grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay. And then I moved to Los Angeles to attend the University of Southern California. And by chance, I signed up for a freshman seminar taught by a theater professor. The title of the freshman seminar was Self-Expression in the Arts. And Professor Truls created this competition. He called it the Culture Vulture Competition. So we'd come to class. This was like one of those 2-credit casual classes, right. No grades or anything. And he made this competition where we'd come in. There was probably 10 or 12 students in the seminar. And each week we'd have to report what we tried that was new. What did we do for the first time? And this was a whole new way of approaching life. For me, I had gone to private Christian schools my whole life and been a very sheltered, living in a bubble, high school student. And then I went off to college, and I had this professor giving me permission and encouraging me and actually rewarding me for trying new things. So I just remember that semester, I was so open. I was like, I have never eaten sushi. Let me go try sushi. I I remember I got my tongue pierced. Many people don't know that. But for college, I had a tongue pierced because I was like, okay, I'm going to get something pierced. What would be the least scarring and the most easy to hide? And it hurt like hell.
I was going to say, it's like one of the most painful ones, isn't it?
Yes, I remember I came to the freshman seminar that week, and there was some sort of like, a group of us had gotten together and decided to sing a song, because like that was something we had never done, like sing in public. And I remember I was like, da 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 da. I couldn't
awesome.
sing, but I just went with it.
Yeah.
So anyway, not that those things made me a polymath, but it certainly opened the door to help me experience what life is like when you're very open to experiences and just try to soak in the fullness of life. And it planted a seed, really. Planted a seed in me and gave me this kind of hunger that I hadn't had before, that made me just want to experience life really, really fully and broadly. And I didn't really have a word for it back then. I certainly didn't know the word polymath. I didn't even know the word polymath until I was well into my dissertation research.
It's not a
I
common
just thought,
word.
oh, I want to be a Renaissance woman.
Yeah. Have you ever talked to that professor again?
I have. Actually, I near the end of my dissertation, I wrote a little bit about him, and I've sent it to him, and we've been in touch.
Oh,
and
cool.
He's commented on a YouTube video or two of mine, and yeah, so he does know the impact he made on my life.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that you got to connect back with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story. It's funny how sometimes just like this thing that seems kind of small at the time, stays with us for so long, and then years later it's having this big impact. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that. So let's talk about the research you did. Start off and tell us a little bit about the study, like the research design. How did you set it up to understand polymaths better?
Yeah. So before I answer your question, just a little quick preamble. There's been very, very little written or researched about polymaths, which was kind of shocking.
You're the first dissertation on this, right?
Yeah, the first and only doctoral dissertation on polymaths. Come on, guys. If you're in a doctoral program, come join me and do some work in that area.
You might be the pioneer.
There have been some scholars who have written and thought about it, but not a whole lot of actual research with modern day polymaths. A lot of what I found was like one polymath, usually a white guy who was dead for like hundreds of years already, that had been written about and studied about and described as a polymath.
I mean, like Da Vinci,
Exactly. Yeah. Leonardo da Vinci is the quintessential polymath. But in terms of understanding modern day polymaths, or polymaths that include women, or understanding what it's like to be them, and just in the modern context of finding trends and themes among a group of them, that just didn't exist. So that's where I came in. And I decided that I wanted to understand their lived experience. What is it like, and how did they get to be that way, and what sense do they make of it? So I ended up doing a qualitative study. I used a method called phenomenology, and the purpose of phenomenology is to understand lived experience. And so using like a very structured and scientific and used approach, and also data analysis, rigorous, tried and true data analysis methods. I conducted the interview. I had to screen people, of course, make sure they met the criteria that had been approved by a committee of scholars and academics in my university. But at the end of the day, basically, I was interviewing modern day polymaths, and then getting the audio transcribed by an outside transcriptionist and put into text form. And then it was a matter of digging through hundreds of pages of data and finding the themes, clustering the quotes into segments of meaning. And that led to 12, I think it's 12 or 13 themes. And then I used those themes to kind of answer my research questions.
Nice. So let's talk a little bit about those themes and what came up. Can you share with us not necessarily go through all 12, but maybe a couple that you think might be particularly interesting to people interested in creativity. What are a couple of
Yeah.
those themes?
I will say that with regards to creativity, that polymaths self-describe, and I didn't measure this, like, are they actually really good at creativity? Like, I didn't get to that point, but just in terms of what they described about themselves, they basically told me that creativity is their superpower. It's what being a polymath allows for in a different and unique and powerful way, as opposed to being a very narrow specialist and what kind of creativity they can have. And that's not to say that if you're a narrow specialist expert in only one area, that you can't also be creative. But there's just something really powerful when you can apply tools and approaches and get insights and spark flames of creativity from other areas into different domains. So
Yeah, I mean, so much of creativity is about combining two unrelated things together, and then cool stuff happens.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's how you get something new,
Right.
new combinations.
Yeah.
And that's because they have a very broad toolkit, because they've had broader exposure. It just puts them in a really good position to be able to be creative.
Yeah.
Other findings besides that one, it doesn't have to do with creativity, but just to highlight a few other themes that I heard. So some of my participants talked about how they had supportive family members and who helped them explore and be exposed and encourage them. And others really didn't have necessarily a very functional, healthy household. And yet, coming from both of those backgrounds, you still end up with polymaths. And so, for some polymaths, having that support and encouragement helped them become polymath. But for others, having a dysfunctional household to some extent served as an inspiration, and it just sort of put some fire under them to make a better situation for themselves. And by putting more tools in their toolkit, by being polymathic, it gave them more avenues to kind of make a better life. And the similar story was true for finances. Some people felt like their family having resources and money helped them become polymathic because they could travel, they can get an education, they could partake in various hobbies. And others felt like, I didn't have a lot of resources, so I had to learn how to do things. I couldn't outsource various things that I needed to get done in my life, so I had to learn. It forced me to learn. So it's an interesting split, that, like, regardless of your family being sort of functional or not so functional, or regardless of how much money you have more, you have less, like, you can still become a polymath.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. It brings hope, I think, for the rest of us. Like, let's not be victims of our circumstance. Let's find a way to make the life that we want to have.
Yeah. Can we back up, and can you describe maybe one or two people in the study of, like, what were they doing to be polymaths? Like, I'm like, the thing I was thinking about earlier is, polymaths would be people that might have multiple PhDs, or because then there's, like, the broadness and the depth. But give us some examples of, like, what's happening in their lives that helps them, or not that helps them, but that defines them as a polymath. Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to mention the one because you said multiple PhDs. There was one woman I interviewed who actually had 3 different master's degrees in all different fields. It was like music, a master's in music, a master's degree in acoustics, like a type of engineering for sound, and then business or something like that. Nice. And she had been a professional opera singer. She was an entrepreneur. She was in the tech space and, like, was forging connections between tech and coding with, like, the arts and music, and, like, bringing people together for hackathons that combine those elements. And she was actively combining her interest. So that's one example. There was also, a guy who had a PhD in physics professor, but also a professional magician and theater professor, and, like, tattoos all over, and jujitsu, and a bartender on the side, and a women's roller derby referee, and, just all these combinations that you wouldn't expect. And I love that. I love when people just don't fit in a box
Yeah.
society prescribes to them, and when people make up their own rules for how they're going to curate and live their own experiences. I just love that. I find it so inspiring.
Yeah. Oh, I would agree. I love that as well.
Yeah.
What I'm just curious if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I might be a polymath. Like, is there any particular criteria that they could think about to know if they are or aren't?
I would say if you don't want to be a narrow specialist professionally, that's a sign. That's a really good sign. And if you just, even with your hobbies, your avocations, so your vocations, your job, your avocations, like your non-job stuff. So if in your avocations, even you're very broad, wanting to try new things, but also develop some level of expertise and grasp of them, that's another sign. If you are highly, highly curious and self-directed in your learning. So in other words, you're not waiting for a teacher, a mentor, parent to tell you what to learn about. Maybe you get help and you learn from them in some way, but you're really taking ownership for your own learning journey in your own life. That's another sign that you're polymathic for sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to mention here. A little bit rebellious. Don't
Yeah.
And a little bit brave, because society will tell you be a specialist, pick one thing and become expert in that, and that's how you'll succeed. So if you are a critical thinker and go, wait a minute, that narrative is not the only narrative, and I'm going to pick a different path that will also be wonderful and impactful. If you have that rebelliousness and that bravery too, that's another sign.
Yeah, that's cool. I feel like I can relate to that.
Yeah.
That's great. So one of the things that I noticed in your themes was this concept of the imposter syndrome, which is something that
Yes.
I've talked about on this podcast before. And I think it's something that I find a lot of my coaching clients bring up, or that comes up, of just, people who are quite adept and quite skilled at whatever they're doing, but just really doubting themselves and feeling like, oh no, somebody's going to figure out that I don't actually know what I'm doing, when really you do, but maybe you don't know everything. But can you talk a little bit more about that, about the imposter syndrome and what you saw with the polymaths?
Yes. So this was unexpected for me. In doing my research on polymaths and an openness to experience and curiosity and creativity and all the other areas that I researched, and in even thinking through, the interview protocol and what am I going to ask about, it never occurred to me to ask about imposter syndrome. And yet it came up in so many of my interviews without my prompting, without my questioning. Just people brought it up on their own. And so it was enough, I heard from enough people that it was a theme.
Wow.
And basically what I heard from them is, so I've been broad, I've not been narrow. But I do have some expertise in at least, a couple of different areas. And when I look at that expertise I have in those couple of areas, uh, and I compare myself to a narrow specialist, I feel like, am I inferior? Like I didn't specialize, and am I as good? And what does this mean? What if I picked a different path? There's a lot of questioning and like doubting. Well, what if I took a different path?
Yeah.
There's so many paths I can take. But yeah, looking at these people, hearing these people, though, I wanted to say, I couldn't say, but I felt like, well, yeah, but you're not narrow and specialized in only one area. So maybe you are not quite as deep in that one area. And this other person who's dedicated their whole life since they're 3, maybe, yeah, they are. But if you look holistically, there's this whole package that you bring because you haven't been narrow and specialized. And both matter. I would never say that specialists are bad or not valuable to society, because they are. They are also valuable. The problem is they get all the attention. Specialists get, that's what we hear. Organizations discriminate against non-specialists. Actually, we're told when you apply for a job,
Yep.
just be very careful what you say. Tell a certain story of specialization in that particular area. And so this is how we're taught, to pretend that we're that way, even if we're not, which is just so sad, because I've seen the power of polymaths. There is a different way of living and being that, and this topic resonates so deeply with people. That's the other thing. I wrote this dissertation because I cared about the topic. I never expected anybody to read it or be interested in it at all. Seriously. I just
I know
thought
the feeling.
a done dissertation is a good dissertation. Move
Yeah.
on with my life. And it has, part of why I'm still engaged in this field is because people are hungry for this. There are so many people living life this way who don't want to be narrow specialists for their whole lives. They want to live broadly and deeply,
Mm-hmm.
and live a life that feels authentic
Yeah.
to who they are. And so that group can also make a difference. That group
Mm-hmm.
can also be creative and make an impact, not just the narrow specialist.
Yeah.
Both matter, not just specialists. And it's not that polymaths are better than specialists, but we need both,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the context of the difficult problems that humanity faces.
Yeah. And I also feel like we're in this time period where it's much easier to diversify because the access to information is so huge. It's so available. I mean,
Exactly.
I'm recording this from my office, and my office is in my garage. And when we bought this house, it was just an empty garage, and then I was like, really, like, I want to turn this section of the garage into an office. So I literally just went to YouTube and I learned how to frame and insulate and install the HVAC, and like I built this whole thing that 10 years ago I could not have done that. Certainly not 20 years ago. There just wouldn't have been the access to resources, but there was like, and I have a neighbor who's a contractor, so I occasionally would text him for some advice. There's some things you can't learn online. But I couldn't have done this, before today, before the
Yeah.
access to resources that, did any people talk about that? Did that come up at all?
Yeah. Well, first off, before I go there, let me just say, wow, I'm so impressed you did that and you learned it. Like your ability to self-teach is very impressive, and it looks beautiful in
Well,
there.
thank you.
Looks
Thank
like you
you.
did an amazing job. So that is very impressive. You have my respect.
Thank you.
Um,
I love that stuff. When you said that polymaths have to, be able to learn and find, on their own, like, oh yeah, I'll be honest, I have a hard time understanding when people don't have that motivation to learn,
mhm.
because I am so driven by it. But anyway, that's
Yes.
definitely,
So I did hear from some of my participants that the internet just makes having information at your fingertips
yeah.
so easy. Books, I mean, library access, there are plenty of ways to gain knowledge, which is different than experiences, but
Yep.
I mean, information is readily available across so much of the globe for almost free.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty cheap to access the internet, and there are also free resources, at least in most American communities, in libraries, and they have computers and internet and everything. So, and our phones make it so easy. Our
Mm-hmm.
phones make it so easy. So I did hear these sorts of things from participants saying, that the internet has made it so much easier, and my phone makes it easier, and books. Even a number of participants talked about being voracious readers. That
Mm-hmm.
was, I don't know, I guess I should have expected it, but I didn't necessarily think to ask about reading in particular. But I heard from so many people that they read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And even before the internet, that they were voracious readers, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them, not all of them, but, just getting information, being open to learning, and not just sort of stuck in a rut of what that's how polymaths live. They want
Yeah.
to learn more and they want to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate to that. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, what advice do you have for someone who's listening now and realizing, oh, I probably am a polymath? Any advice for
Yes.
them?
My advice would be to try to get comfortable with that identity,
Hmm.
to own it, because there's something powerful, I think, that can happen when you're like, this is what I am, and I have a word for it, and I can share with people, and I can find other people. Now that I have this word, I can find resources for it. And that's really part of what I'm trying to do as well, is just spread awareness for this word and this way of living and this way of thinking, so that people feel more comfortable with it. A big challenge polymaths face is that there's a lack of awareness, and there's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a discrimination to some extent in
Mm-hmm.
organizations. Um, and it can be a difficult road. It can be a lonely road sometimes, and there can be hurdles. And that's a lot of what I think my dissertation sort of unearthed, was the pros and cons, the
Yeah.
challenges involved when you forge your own path and don't don't fit in that box, break out of the box and, make your own path. So I would just say it's okay. It's normal. It's good. Own it.
Yeah.
Do it on purpose. Like, go explore your polymathy even further.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think about when I was building this office. Well, before I was building it, when I had the idea, like, okay, here's what I want to do. I was sure that I could do this myself and not have to hire a contractor. And many people in my life were like, oh no, Amy, you can't do that. Are you crazy? You're not a carpenter. You don't have this training, blah, 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 And my wife was afraid I was going to like cost us a lot more money and, mess it all up, which, all these are valid concerns. But earlier, like about 2 years ago, we had our kitchen redone, and the contractor was our neighbor who lives behind us. And so every day for 2 months, he's coming into our house, and I'm getting to know him. And I was also really paying attention to what he was doing and the progression of like what order he would do things in. And so when I was thinking about the garage project, I asked him. I said, Jeremy, what do you think? Do you think that I could do this? And he was like, oh, absolutely, you could do this. I was like, really? Okay, he's the only person who actually even knew what it meant. Like everybody else who was saying, oh no, you can't do that. They didn't actually know what to do. They didn't have any of that expertise. So it was just kind of interesting to me that I think you have to be, like you said, just be resilient, own it. It's okay. It's a good thing. Go for it. Even if it's like this complete pivot.
Yes. Well, I love how you didn't listen too much to the naysayers and decided for yourself what you were going to be capable and what you were going to do. And this actually was something I heard from a number of participants as well. Like one participant said, she was going to double major in engineering and theater or something. Mm-hmm. And she talked to her academic advisor, and the academic advisor suggested she just have one and that she go with theater, which was like a better fit for a woman.
Oh,
and she listened and she did it. And then I have another example of a woman I interviewed who was very adept and like a natural whiz at math from a young age. And she was a math major in college, super overachiever, like straight A's forever. Like that's what she was used to. And she, on one of her math tests, got like a B plus. And she walked into her academic advisor's office and said she wanted to change her major because, she got this B. And the advisor was like, that's not a good enough reason to change your major, and prevented her. So what you can see is that people you look to for advice and counsel, they can sway you, and they can sway you for good. They can sway you for bad, but you have to own, like you really have to decide for yourself at the end of the day what you're capable of and what feels right for your path in life. And I think it's helpful to get other opinions, but it's also best for you to really make decisions you feel good about and you feel comfortable about. So kudos to you for taking on the garage project. You knew you could do it and you did it.
Yeah, it was a good learning. I also learned, and I didn't do the whole thing myself. We did hire, electrical and some things like that. But
sure,
that's also about, okay, balancing like the time and what you want to learn. Like, I'm sure I could have done the electrical, but just the depth of learning I would have to have done, I wasn't ready for that. Just time-wise more than anything. But yeah, I think you're right that it is about paying attention to, is this advice fit with who I am? And like listening to your gut, listening to your intuition about making decisions and where you'll go.
Yeah, I like to say we're all the curators of our own life. Mm-hmm. Creators, yes, but I like this word curate because it sort of implies like you're giving some thought to what you will pick and select in your life path. And I just feel like, we know we have this life. Who knows if we have other ones? We know we get this one here. Let's live it on purpose. Let's live it authentically. Let's live it all in. And you don't know if you get another one. So make the most of it. And it would just be such a shame to let society's expectations or family's expectations or friends' judgments or anything like that dictate how we live out our lives, because we own our lives. Yeah. I own my life. No one else does. So I take ownership of it and I take responsibility of it, and I get the benefits of it too. It's a scary responsibility to really own your life, but it's also really enriching and wonderful to take it by the reins and make it your own.
Yeah, that's good advice. I love it, Angela.
Yeah, thank you.
So, one of the things that I like to do in the podcast is end with a weekly challenge. So, something that you can share with listeners that would help them apply some of the concepts that you've talked about. So, what is a weekly challenge you might give to listeners this week?
Yes, I want to give two. Can I give two?
You can give two, yeah.
Okay. One is try something new. Get outside your comfort zone, maybe, or maybe not even outside. Just try something new and see how you feel. Reflect on it, see what you learned, and did you like it, and how was it trying something new. And the other thing I'll suggest too, as it relates to polymathy and creativity, is think about an issue, a challenge you have. Is there another area of life, an approach, a modality, a way of thinking from over there that you could apply to the problem that's new? That's analogical thinking. Applying something from over here and seeing how it works over here. Try that. Cool. See what happens. It could, you could end up with a really creative way. Just think outside the box,
Yeah.
That's really, that's what polymaths do. They live outside the box. They think outside the box. And it allows them to be really creative and authentic at the same time, and to solve problems in unique ways. So if you have a problem in your life, just try some new approaches from other areas and see how it works for you.
Cool. I love it. Great. And how can people learn more about you or connect with you?
Yes, I have a YouTube channel called Polymaths with an apostrophe, yes, Polymaths Place. I also have a Facebook group called Polymaths Place. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well. If you look for Angela Cotellessa, I'm pretty sure I'm the only Angela Cotellessa on there. Nice. Or if there are others, I think there would be very few. But people from all over the world actually have been finding me on LinkedIn, and I think that's a really good way to do it. You can also email me at polymathsplace@gmail.com. I created that email for this kind of work. So those are a few ways to find me.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much for being on the show. I love talking with you.
Yeah, I really had a good time. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Angela. So awesome to have you on the show. Loved your insights and your comments. And it was really cool to hear about your research and get a better understanding of polymathy. If you would like to get the links, go to links and the resources that Angela mentioned, you can get that at the show notes, which is climerconsulting.com/101. And Climer is spelled CLIMER. So check that out. You'll also find the weekly challenge there. If you do the weekly challenge, which I highly recommend, you can make a comment on the show notes there, and I will respond to you. I also want to invite you to reach out on social media. That's another place you can share about the weekly challenge. And you'll find me on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook under Amy Climer or Climer Consulting. And so you can connect with me there if you'd like. I'm probably the most active on LinkedIn. Another announcement, this February 2020, I will be doing a series of free webinars around innovation in the workplace. So if you're interested in that, I'll be posting about that on social media, but probably the best way is to join my email list. About once a month or so, I send out an email with some insights and reflections on innovation, and that's where I always announce events that I'm doing. So you can sign up there at climerconsulting.com. Just go there and you'll see a pop-up to sign up for the email list. Also, later in February, I am launching another cohort of the Deliberate Creative course. And this is a mentoring program that's designed to help you be more creative and innovative at work. And so if you're interested in deliberately, intentionally applying creativity so that you can be more innovative and your company can be more innovative, this is a great opportunity. It's a cohort model, so there's a start and end date. It'll start in February, late February. And you can find out more about that on the webinars or the email, or just shoot me a message and let's set up a phone call and I'll tell you all about it. It's great to be back. I'm really excited about the upcoming episodes. I think you're going to really enjoy them. Next up is an episode about creative space. And that one will be a little bit more visual, so it might be helpful to check out the YouTube video for that, although you'll still get a lot out of it if you're just listening to the audio. But I'm very excited moving forward, and have a wonderful creative week. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Deliberate Creative Podcast. Listen to more episodes and learn more about creativity, leadership, and teams at climberconsulting.com.